Back in my day, there was this thing called the Rubik's Cube. It was a puzzle that you twisted and turned to get all the colors to one side and to make a beautiful pattern where all the colors aligned. And it seemed like no matter how you twisted or turned, it would just lead to utter frustration and seemed impossible to solve. It seemed like almost that you needed to be a magician and have a magic trick to do it. However, what you discovered was that there was a pattern, that there was a system into doing it. And once you learned that pattern and system, it would take you mere seconds to solve. And you would never have to use anything else to do it. It could be jumbled as much as possible, and still, if you use the system, you'll solve it. In writing, there's something similar called the 3-act structure. The 3-act structure is a system that's designed to help you tell your story. Most stories, if not all, have a 3-act structure. It's the how you get to the 3-act structure that's the interesting part in writing, because not everybody does it the same. There are many methods that you can use to get to the 3-act structure, and that is what this show is about, as we take a look at how you develop your own 3-act structure that works for you.
All right, hey guys, I'm Katie Salidas. I am the author of the Immortalis series, the Little Werewolf series, the Chronicles of the Uprising, and a few other series, with more to come, as always. And I'm also the host and producer of the Spilling Ink Show.
Hi, I'm Isa McLaren. I'm a crime fiction writer. I've written A Kiss for Luck, and I'm also the CEO of Three Furies Press, a small independent publishing company.
Hello guys, I'm Christopher Russell. I'm the author of the epic fantasy series Divinity's Twilight. You can see a cover behind me. And I'm excited to be here and discuss how there's absolutely no planning or rhyme or reason or method behind what we do.
Hi, I'm Debra Parmley, and I'm primarily known for writing military romantic suspense, but I'm a multi-genre author, and I also teach writing classes and do private sessions online.
Hello, everyone. I am STACY OVERBY. I'm the author of the Black Ops series, a sci-fi space opera. I also do some graphic design for Three Furies Press, which means, yes, Isa's my boss, so I gotta maybe behave myself. Or maybe not. That could be fun.
You've met me, right?
I know. I'm not planning on behaving myself. So.
Nah.
With the idea of pantsing, there's a lot of misconception about how and why you pant. So kind of go through a little bit of your process and the idea of why it is that you like this method.
When I first started writing, I assumed that you had to write a certain way. And I thought that, you had to outline everything. It had to follow all the structures. And I tried that. And my first book took me 5 years to write because of that, because I lost the joy in writing because I felt so boxed in and so structured that there was no room for creativity. It was laid out before me, and I was essentially just copying everything down. Once I gave up on the original outline for my story, I was able to write it in 6 months because I was enjoying writing the story as it came to me and experiencing, what the characters are going through in the moment, rather than this is expected in this chapter, this is expected in that chapter. So that's how I started going from the plotting method to the pantsing method.
I guess I'm kind of the opposite. When I first started writing, I really came at it from a kind of a less knowledgeable standpoint, we'll put it that way, where I didn't realize that there was a lot of these, these rules and structure, and here's how you're supposed to do this and that. I just wrote it. I just sat down and I wrote it. And that's kind of still how I do it. So I kind of go, there's a method to pantsing things. There's a plan in it. You got me. I just sit down and write it.
I had the writing rules and regulations and everything drilled into me in creative writing classes, and I hate being told what to do. Also, I can't think when I was outlining, I can't think more than like 3 steps ahead. I'm terrible at playing chess. What's going to happen next? Well, I don't know. That kind of depends on how they react to this. And I've always had people telling me, oh, no, you tell those characters what you do. No, for me, it's the other way around. I have to figure out, I may have an idea where things are going, but then I have to get into it and see how they react. So the plotting part never, ever works for me.
For me, it was a progression because I started out writing poetry, which was never a planned thing. It was more of a in the zone experiential type of writing. So I went from that to writing short stories, and that continued. You don't have to have a lot of structure in a short story. I mean, there needs to be some, but it's a little bit freer. And then from there into novels, at which point, okay, so this will probably make some people laugh. So I wrote my first romance. At the time, it had to be 100,000 words. And I went to a local RWA convention, and I had an agent appointment and an editor appointment. They both requested the manuscript, and I hadn't broken it into chapters. I didn't know how long a chapter should be. So I went from that to trying to learn everything I could from RWA about how to write a novel, and found out a lot of people have a lot of opinions about that. But at the end of the day, I have to be able to sit in the seat and let the writing flow. And it works best for me if I just do that without trying to write in a corset.
For me, writing is like a whole bunch of snapshots. You see the last page of the book, you see some of the climaxes and the important character moments. And from there, it's your job as an author to, well, the characters really living and breathing through you, to connect the dots, to reach each of those points. As each of these scenes play out, my interest is in figuring out what's going to happen to the characters as they do it, what the next big action sequence is, what the next twist is. And as I'm writing a scene, I'll often throw out the first, second, or even third idea I have and find a fourth idea even during the process of writing. That incident will be 3 or 4 paragraphs out from where I am currently, and in my mind, I'll just be changing things. And so it's not necessarily that I'm a plotter or a pantser. I think I'm a hybrid somewhere in between, but that I do most of my thinking and most of my planning in my mind. That's where I stored it until it just got too overwhelming and I had to start writing things down.
To tag off what Christopher just said, my style morphed into what I call the to-do list method, where I have an idea of what's supposed to happen within the story. And so I write a to-do list for my character, you know, milk, eggs, cheese, kill the dragon, go home. And as I'm writing, I have direction, but that direction allows the freedom to figure out how those events play out.
So
okay. I would want to interject one thing.
Yeah, please.
For the ultimate pantsers here, I still write my manuscripts. The first draft is one big long page, and that's it. No chapters, no nothing. You can still do that way and be successful.
I do the same, so you're good.
I love chapter headings, so I have to have chapters.
All right. Nice.
I don't put chapters in until the very end. I literally, every time that I write, and I do write fairly linearly, I just throw in a couple of asterisks and go, okay, this is where I'm stopping this particular scene for today. And the next scene I'll write will be the next one, and it'll be marked off my asterisks. And then at the very end is when I start putting those groups into actual chapters.
Nice.
No, I have to write in chapters because if I have to think about going back and inserting them, that's too much work. Let's just do that as we go.
Nice.
I don't even really think about it when I do my chapters because I've gotten so used to doing them. So it was, again, a progression. But it's just kind of like I get to the end of that scene and I'm like, oh, yeah, okay, so it's chapter 4. You know, and I just put chapter 4, then on I go. One thing I do that I didn't ever do in the beginning is that I read the last paragraph of every chapter, and I make sure that there's something there to turn the page. So, I mean, I isolate each of those out, pull them out of there, and I look at it and I say, would I turn the page if this was the last thing I read in this chapter? So,
Would I go to sleep tonight if this was the last thing I read in this chapter?
that's it. That's it. So, chapters can be good.
It can be, yeah.
Debra, responsible for insomnia for as long as she's been writing.
Yeah.
You know, as an editor, that's one of the things I look for in the manuscripts I read. That's, you know, that's a send it back to the author kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, nice.
Yep.
Nice. I'm curious, what do you feel like is the biggest misconception or unfair criticism of a pantser?
What I said before is that people think that the author is in charge of the story. No, no way. I don't get to determine what happens or even how it happens. That's up to the characters and the organic flow of the story.
I would agree with that. The other thing I will say is this idea that if you don't outline it, you're going to have so much more editing. It's going to be so much more work. Da 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 da. For me, it was really the opposite. I think it was Scars. I tried to outline and follow the outline. What came out was not fit for human consumption. So in working on Nightmares, I did have an outline. I have no idea where it went, and I know I am so far off script, it's not even funny if I was trying to write by an outline, and I don't really care at this point anymore. But I found that when I would try to follow the outlines, I couldn't do it. It was so bad. There was so much editing that it would need that it's like, okay, let me just start over. Whereas when I'm able to just follow the organic flow of the story of things that are happening as they're happening. I mean, yes, there's definitely editing that needs to happen. But for me, it's not nearly as much as if I were to try to fit it into a chapter and follow the outline, and this has to happen here and that has to happen there kind of stuff.
I got 2 points to make on this one. The first one is that if your first draft isn't a hot mess, you're doing something wrong, because that first draft is supposed to suck. And that's usually what I tell a lot of my author clients when I'm coaching them through writer's block is, don't edit while you're writing. Your first draft is just about getting a story on paper. If it sucks, that means you are doing what you're supposed to do. You are vomiting that story out of your brain and onto the paper. You can't edit something if it's not written. So that first draft, pantser or plotter, does not matter. Your first draft is not meant for human consumption. It's just meant to get the story on paper. So with that said, my second part that I wanted to point out on the biggest misconceptions, the one I've seen is that pantsers don't write very plot heavy stories because they're focused on the characters, and plotters don't have heavy character developed stories because they're more focused on the plot. And I think those are misconceptions on either side.
And I have to agree with that. And I think it's a mistake to ever assume something about someone who has a different writing style than you do. Because it's like anything, if you haven't experienced it yourself, well, how do you know how that is? So that's the first thing I'd say. And then to add to that, there is no wrong way to write. So if anyone's telling you that there is a right and a wrong way, don't listen to that. You have to find your way. And your way will work really well once you find it. Sometimes you've got to experiment a little. I think there's a lot of misconceptions on both sides because maybe some authors haven't tried the other way. The ones that have tried the other way don't generally make those kinds of comments. So I would say, hey, why don't you try the other style before commenting on it?
And piggybacking on the revision discussion, I tend to take a very deliberate approach to my first drafts that I will, and they say that this is taboo, this is a sin for authors, that as I'm going along, I will stop and do research if I need to, that I will go out and search for new ways to say something, new ways to structure sentence. I will pay attention to details of grammar and syntax while balancing plot and character. And that's just because that's who I am, that I like to keep all these balls juggling at the same time. And I think that the of course you have to go back and edit, you have to go back and revise, but you don't have to have a hot mess. Not saying that a lot of people don't, but that you can have a decent product, that you can get a thread, a storyline down without having to basically take it apart. That your first draft is a skeleton, and you're going to go back and add the muscles, the sinew, and the tissue, and organs, and everything later. But you can also work on building those and constructing those as you go. And so there's a middle ground to be had between all the different extremes that people talk about.
That's a really good point to make, because again, it goes back to style. Your style is going to be whatever works for you. And for a lot of the authors that I tell them, just vomit it on the page, it has to deal with more of the authors who are stuck on, let's say, chapter 5, because chapter 5 just isn't perfect enough, and they can't move past chapter 5 and get to the next part of the story because they feel like chapter 5 has to be perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect on that first run. Get to chapter 6 or you never will. That's what I mean when I say, you just got to vomit it out there. Get it on the page so you can go back and fix it later.
There's another trick you can use on that if you're stuck and it's not going well. Write the opposite of that scene, because it breaks that mindset that you're in, that it has to go this way, it has to be this way, and it lets the flow of the story energy open up again. Or just put a different character in there. How would they see it? But don't leave that one in. That's just to help you get past that stuck point.
When you're stuck, specifically if you get stuck in one chapter and you can't move forward, don't be afraid to leapfrog. You can jump to chapter 7 if you don't know how to get to chapter 6 and write what you feel comes in chapter 7. Put a pin in it. You'll come back and you'll bridge that gap eventually when you had time to clear your mind by looking at the scene differently through what has happened afterwards.
I mean, you need to have words somehow. So whether it's skip ahead, another tactic I use is I'll go find story or writing prompts from different friends and go, okay, take this character, use that prompt, what happens? It may not hit the page. It may not actually make it into that final story, but it gives me an insight into the character. It gives me an insight into something else that's like, oh, I didn't know that. And that connection then can be enough to go, now I know what I need to do to get through this scene into the next piece. Because I'm a little ADHD. I can't jump around. I lose my train of thought way too easily if I try to jump around. I need to write fairly linearly. So that's the one structured piece of what I do. But that's another way of when I get stuck, of how I get out of that is I start exploring, writing these side pieces as just kind of an exploration of, who is this character? What's going on?
Another thing that applies to pantsers is, and this is any author, and I'm sure you guys do this too, never delete anything. Even if you pull something that you didn't think was right for that scene or that chapter, doesn't mean that it's not going to be right in the same book later down the line for another character, or even for another work in progress, for something else that you want to do. That anything you put to paper has value. And that's something that people do misconstrue about pantsing, is that a lot of what we produce isn't going to have value and therefore needs to just be thrown in the waste bin.
That's an
But
excellent.
if you're going to do that, remember where you put those files.
Yes, yes.
Otherwise, at 3 a.m., you'll be trying to hack into your ex-husband's network so you can find that D drive and that one text file from the years ago.
Put it in a big file that says ideas I thought were terrible but might not be.
There you go.
Yes.
The one issue that I have, and maybe you guys have a fix for this, is doing something goes here, I do that too. Especially when it's like research stuff, I'll highlight it or put a little asterisk there and say research more about this later. But the problem that I have about doing that is when I go back to it, I oftentimes well, I guess it's not a problem because it's probably better, but I end up rewriting the whole thing. I don't, I can't just continue off of what I had already wrote. I'll read it and then I'll go, oh, this sucks, and then I'll just rewrite the whole thing.
And that happens. Unfortunately, pantsing does involve a lot of rewriting, because sometimes you do write yourself into a corner and you have to delete or move to another file and restart a chapter or maybe 2 chapters to send your character back down the right path. And it just happens. It's a fact of writing. Even when you're plotting something, you could still plot yourself into a hole and you have to fix it. You have to go back.
It's basically a dichotomy of when do you do the work? Do you do it up front or do you do it later? And a lot of people, you probably got this from your planners, is that they get excitement out of the scenes as they're outlining, and then they're just filling in the blanks as they get to the meat and the bones and the story itself. Whereas we get the excitement while we're doing it, and the problem is, well, it could be exciting, but it may not be a part of the story that you're trying to tell. It may be detrimental to the story. And so you have to go back and find something else that'll interest you or intrigue you. That'll take the story in the direction you think it needs to go.
I think your key word there, exciting, is really, really important. And I think it can change from story to story, because some I have plotted a little bit and some I've not plotted at all. And so the stories can be different, and you can be different when you come to the story. I think it's important for authors to remember when they finish a writing time that has been exciting and they are feeling really good about it and it's flowing well, and then step back and think, okay, what created that? Because I need to do more of that. And that's a key way to find out what works best for you.
I think also with pantsers, the biggest misconception is that oftentimes we're not structured. Like we just go and rip through, and we go from beginning to end. That's not how writing works. A lot of us have set goals that we whether it's word count, or I'm going to sit down and write tonight, or I'm going to spend this hour of this day writing. There's a lot. We still all do that, right? Am I correct in assuming that from everybody here?
It's just a lack of structured writing. Doesn't structure our writing time, doesn't matter, or it doesn't mean that we can't set goals from when we expect a story to be done. It's just the approach to the actual writing itself is done with the freedom of writing what comes to mind then.
And I'd also say that it doesn't constitute not having ideas at all, or not having, I wouldn't call it an outline, but a book of ideas. After I got through the first half of Divinity's Twilight Rebirth, there was so much that was going into the world building and everything that I'd created that I had to start having a notebook or recording notes on my phone. And so what I did was, when I'd have all these ideas away from a writing session, I'd put them into a folder, into a file. And then when I got to a new chapter or a section, I'd go back through the entire list and go, this could belong here, this could belong here, this could belong here. And that's not necessarily stuff related directly to a character or an element, but it was to remind me that I think that these might take place in this scene, that they might influence it, or they might add flavor to the scene. And so it's not necessarily that you're creating everything on the spot. It's that you're synthesizing everything on the spot, that you're congealing it into a product that, you, like we were saying earlier, might not be fit for human consumption, but at least it's edible.
And at least for me, it's not that I have no structure. I'm a very visual person. Save the Cat, the beat sheet, you know, how it goes up like this, or looking at the hero's journey going around like this, and sort of visually, mentally overlay that on my story so that I can, you know, write towards that, like Katie's to-do list. You know, I know at this point we should be entering this phase of the character development, or you know, the heist needs to be this far along by here. And so it's not like there's no structure at all. It's just not a rigid outline structure.
Back when I wrote for 5 publishers and had all those deadlines I was juggling, I was highly organized. And, you know, I've got to write this section on this one today, and then this one on this one tomorrow, and boom, boom, boom. I was organized, but I didn't impose that in my writing. So you can be a very professional, organized writer and still just pants the heck out of something.
Well, let's face it, how many times do we get our best idea when we're in the shower or driving in the car, where we're not at a place where we can stop and write it all down? And so throughout the day, you're thinking of that scene that you want to write. So when you come to the desk at the end of the night, or whenever your writing time is, and you go, my goal today was 1,000 words, you've got that scene already in your head. It makes writing that 1,000 words and reaching that goal that much easier.
That is funny that you should mention that. I was talking about the first part of my book over here. So this was 3 years ago is when I started working on it in earnest, putting things to page. And every Saturday, or it was every Friday, sometime during the week, I went out and mowed the lawn. And that was my thinking about the book time. And so I came up with basically the entire plot structure for the entire first part of the novel, some 100, 150 pages, while I was mowing. And of course, things changed. That as I pantsed along and wrote, I came up with better ideas than what I'd had originally. But the initial structure came from that time of manual labor when I was able to go off and be in my world in my mind.
I would say, that I would present myself as a plotter and then have you rip me apart. But it sounds like that you all are, again, you guys are being very nice, and everybody has their own style, and outliners are cool, and we kind of do kind of a hybrid thing,
Well, I think that the primary difference between plotters and pantsers is I don't think pantsers often try to become plotters. We've all said that we've experimented with it at some point or another, and we still do it to some degree, regardless of what that is. However, I don't think plotters ever try to be pantsers, that it never goes the other way. And that might be what you're looking for. It's not quite ripping them apart, but it's just what we as writers think that we need to be doing, that plotting is held up as the ideal, at least as far as traditional publishing goes, I think. But so they don't go downhill to becoming pantsers, but we sometimes attempt to go back uphill.
Right, because in the traditional publishing world, everything operates that way, so you have to have a synopsis. I think one reason authors don't like writing them is that their book's not done yet. And there's that setup of the expectations, which then if you can't meet those expectations, then what? So there's a natural hesitance to want to write a synopsis, But I think that in that case, if you're a pantser and that doesn't work well for you, it might be better to finish the story and then present it, which is what you usually have to do if you haven't already signed with that publisher. And if you're already with them, you can just say, look, I'd rather just finish my first draft and then send you a synopsis.
Well, I've always been told whenever I went to conferences and did pitches and things like that, I've always been told, don't hand them your manuscript, but always have it done, or at least the idea done, the skeleton done, as Christopher put it, the first draft being your skeleton. At least have the skeleton done, because you may get an email from them tomorrow or the next week, and they go, okay, you send this to me by, in 48 hours, which has happened to me with scripts a lot. I mean, whenever I've queried a script and, pitched it out, and then I give them the one pager, or I give them a synopsis, or, a treatment is what they call it in filmmaking, in screenwriting. If you give them the treatment, which is the same thing as a synopsis, but if you do that, and then and then they like it, they're going to ask for it, and they literally want it in 2 or 3 days because they're thinking about it and they don't want to lose that train of thought about your story. So you should always be prepared to have something for them. That's always how I've been taught.
That applies when you're trying to break into the market, but for, established with a publisher or established with an agent, when you're pitching that next idea, sometimes you're doing it just as an idea pitch. And at that point, you really do have to have a summary or something written ahead of time so that you can kind of entice them to say yes to it as well.
Well, and it also secures you a spot on the publishing. They only have so many spots, and they have to work so far in advance for their production that they have to have that. It's how their business operates. I mean, they're not asking for a synopsis to be mean or anything. They just have to have that to do their job. So then the problem is if they plan for that, they planned for apples and you gave them oranges. So if you could have a little bit of an idea where you're going with it, I'd say maybe at least the first 4 or 5 chapters, so that you know your characters a little bit. That would be helpful.
All right, but one more follow-up question: do you still write in a corset?
No.
Love that analogy.
Never.
That seems painful.
Yeah. I had fun writing the first book in my 1920s Flapper series, I have a scene where she cuts up her corset, and I had great fun writing that one.
Oh yeah.
I always found it chafed in the wrong spot. That was my Christopher, how about for you?
So you moved to a sports bra?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.